guys, welcome to my channel. First of all, this is not a very simple job in the way that you have to remove some sensitive parts of your engine. So before you start, you should be absolutely sure that your problem is the head gasket. There are many ways that the gasket can fail. It can fail here, allowing the coolant to mix with the engine oil. Here, allowing the coolant to enter the combustion chamber. Here, allowing the oil to enter the combustion chamber. Or here, allowing the compression of one cylinder to escape to the other. Each fault has its own symptoms, and there are plenty of videos on YouTube on how to diagnose a bad head gasket. Luckily for me, my gasket was fine. My problem was related with the valves not sealing properly. What I found was my relatively new spark plugs had different states of health. As you can see here, the spark plug from cylinder number 1 seems new. Spark plugs from cylinder number 2 and 3 already have some carbon accumulated, and the spark plug from cylinder number 4 was completely covered in carbon. This might indicate improper valve sealing, so I performed a compression test. I borrowed a very old compression tester that has a needle which travels to the right as the compression builds inside the cylinder. And I measured the 4 cylinders, and I found that cylinder number 1 is the one with the most compression, and cylinder number 4 is the one with the least, which is consistent with the state of the spark plugs. Nevertheless, the car manual states that the compression should be around 14 kilograms per square centimeter, so all my cylinders were far from the specs, which means that the cylinder head must be disassembled and the valves should be left to enhance the valve sealing. So before we start, I already disassembled some parts that you will not need, because in my last ride I hit a tree and bent some components. Well, what can I say? Shit happens. So I bent the frame, the lower arm, so I've cut the bent part, insert a new tube inside the frame, welded everything together, and now it's straight. Well, what you want to see is not this, so let's go to the point. The idea is to remove everything attached to the intake manifold, to remove the exhaust manifold, and to remove the timing belt. I believe that these things are more or less self-explanatory, so I will shut up now and let's go to work. will need to unbolt the 10-cylinder head bolts. The manual do not say anything about removing the bolts, but it says something about reinstalling. So it didn't hurt to remove the bolts in the reverse order. The order to install the bolts is this, so I removed them in the inverse order. After removing the bolts, you just need to remove the cylinder head. This is the aspects of my cylinders. As you can see, the carbon deposits on the cylinder number 1 are reasonable, but the carbon deposits on cylinder number 4 are way too much. Again, this is consistent with the compression tests that I performed. So at this point, this is what we need to do. We need to disassemble the cylinder head, clean everything so we can measure the head distortion, and replace the head gasket. The top bolts of the cylinder head gave me a little bit of hard time, so I ended up to remove them the hard way and reinstall new bolts. You should keep everything as clean as possible, and despite the manual doesn't mention it, I marked everything so I can install it in the exact same order and position. This is a good time to remove the oil pan. In fact, for the job you probably find that you don't need to remove it, but as you will see it later, I'm glad that I removed mine. So you will need to drain the oil, remove the oil filter, then you will need to remove the front differential, and finally just remove the oil pan bolts and remove the oil pan and the filter that is inside. Once again, I didn't film it. Then the cleaning process starts, and you might find this boring, but it is important that everything is as clean as possible so we can measure the distortion accurately. Take your time in this process without using aggressive sandpaper. Your cylinder head should look like this. With the cylinder head clean, we should measure if there is any distortion out of specifications. The manual says that the distortion should be measured in 6 locations that I highlighted here. To measure the distortion, you should get a straight edge ruler and with a feeler gauge check the distortion. The manual states that the maximum distortion is 0.05 millimeters, so you should use the appropriate gauge. Unfortunately, I don't have a straight edge ruler, so I used one of these tubes that were on the cylinder head. It seems right, and good news is that my head is not distorted, at least I guess. At this point, I sent my head to the mechanic shop to lap the valves, and I ordered a new head gasket set. So the assembling process starts. First, mount the oil filter. Make sure that you lubricate the O-ring with the engine oil, and do not over tight the oil filter. Just screw it by hand and then give it a little snug with the oil filter tool. Then install the oil pan. You will need to use a gasket maker since it does not have a specific gasket, and you might think that it would be easier to put the gasket maker on the oil pan rather than in the engine, but as you will need to mount the filter with the oil pan into the place, I was afraid to damage the gasket maker in the process, so I did it this way. Then reassemble the cylinder head, and as I marked everything, I installed the components in the exact same location and order. When installing these components, make sure that you lubricate them because they will need to work before the engine oil builds up pressure inside the engine, so use a generous amount of oil when installing these things. install the cylinder head, just lay the gasket in the correct position, install this guiding pin, and just lay the cylinder head in its position. Try to only touch the gasket once, so you don't damage it. Use the guiding pins to center the cylinder head, and only when both pins are aligned, put some downward force to set the head into place. The manual says that the cylinder head bolts should be lubricated with engine oil before installed. So first blow some air into the threads to remove any existing dirt, then lubricate the bolts and just snug them into the place. Do not tighten yet. These bolts have a specific pattern to install, so you should follow this order and tighten to the specific torque, which is from 70 to 75 Newton meters. First, I set my torque range to 70 Newton meters and followed the tightening pattern, and then I set my torque range to 75 and repeat the pattern. Then you need to install the timing belt, and I confess that I didn't do a great job filming it. The idea is that you need to align these marks on the camshaft with the mark on the cover, and do the same on the crankshaft. Mine was misaligned, so I set it into place. Then you install the belt and the belt tensioner. At this point, just snug the tensioner bolts by hand. You should make sure that all the marks are still aligned after you install the tensioner. Then, the manual says that you need to rotate the engine one full rotation before tightening the tensioner bolt. Unfortunately, my camera stopped filming here, but you get the idea. After the timing belt is mounted, recheck the alignment marks, and if your engine is in this position, the distributor should be pointing downwards. Mine was pointing upwards, so I corrected. Now, with the engine in this position, you can adjust the lash of the valves 3, 4, 6 and 8. The specified valve lash is depicted in this figure, so you can use a filler gauge to adjust the valve lash of these valves. Then, to adjust the remaining valves, you will need to rotate the crankshaft one full rotation. Just rotate the crankshaft until the crankshaft mark align with the zero again, and adjust the remaining valves. Then you will need to reassemble the intake manifold and mount the exhaust manifold, which is pretty much the reverse order of disassembling. So let's work. After everything is installed, and because there are still many parts of the engine that are not properly lubricated, what I did was I filled the engine with the recommended oil, disconnected the ignition system, and cranked the engine for a while so the oil starts circulating through the engine. Finally, you may start the engine and probably you will need a stroboscopic light to fine-tune the ignition temperature. And that's it. Successfully replaced the head gasket. Well, thanks for watching. Please feel free to leave your comments and subscribe for upcoming videos.